Wonderful. Man, Hillcrest family, it's a privilege to gather on Sundays, and just some pretty cool stuff to alert you. And if you haven't gotten one, would you raise your hand? And I know these kids would love to track you down. If not, Tavi's going to raise his hand. Tavi has not gotten one yet. Stuff that happens around our campus that you may or may not be aware of. We get to partner with Memorial Baptist Church in High Point, and 3 times a year, some pastors get together and hear from some theologian. And this past Monday, we got to host about 85 pastors and ministry leaders from around the state. And they came and got to hear Dr. Schreiner unpack some ideas, and then got to collaborate and encourage one another afterwards. That's through your investment. So thank you for how you guys invest in pastors and ministers across our state. And then Tyler and I got to be in Kansas City this past week from Tuesday to Thursday, and got to connect with the organization that is helping fund this grant. And so it was a privilege. So thank you for even allowing Tyler and I to go and be a part of that this week. And we did all right. We made it. We're here. We still get along. We still like each other. And like Fred said, I would encourage you, bring this back every single Sunday over the course of March, but a chance to digest and explore what is going on around here, but not to the exclusion of Nehemiah. Like Fred said, you will continue to see Nehemiah unpacked over the course of these next 4 weeks. And like Fred mentioned, a chance to just reflect on what God might be inviting you into. We've been in Ezra, Nehemiah, the 3 movements. And P.S., man, this is wild. Today is my daughter's 11th year birthday. It's crazy. It's crazy. 11. I can no longer say my twin 10-year-olds, and I have to say my twin 11-year-olds, and that doesn't sound and roll off the tongue as smoothly and as easily. We are continuing in Ezra, Nehemiah, and Ezra, we saw 2 massive movements. The people of God, following God as his people in the face of opposition externally, is a story of faithfulness from ruins to revival. The second part of Ezra, seeing that as the people of God following him in the face of internal opposition, is a story of faithfulness. God's faithfulness to his people and our faithfulness to him. So in Nehemiah, you would imagine the same story unfolds. Nehemiah sees that the walls of Jerusalem are destroyed, and Nehemiah loves God and wants to see him glorified. His heart is stirred for what's taking place, and he begins soliciting and garnering support and God's help through the king to see this effort happen. And he begins assembling a team of people begin coming together to see this happen. But last week, and I thought Rick did a great job of highlighting criticism and the opposition that happens externally in this journey of rebuilding lives. This morning, we get to think through more that internal opposition. And so this is where we're headed, and then I'd love to pray for us, and we're going to jump in. This morning, Nehemiah reveals God's heart for the vulnerable and God's expectation for his people to act. In the midst of opposition, we're now going to see internal opposition within the context of the Jewish people and how there were challenges, and people were not necessarily as encouraged to support and love and invest in one another. Nehemiah sees that and reveals God's heart for the vulnerable and God's expectation for his people to act when they see those needs. So pray with me, and we will jump in together. God, you're so good. Thank you for the privilege of gathering to worship you in a multi-generational community, that we see we see what you've done in our life, and we want to reflect back the radiance of your worth. And so reveal yourself this morning as we walk through Nehemiah 5 and help us gain a clear picture of your heart for the needs around us. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. So pretty clear. Nehemiah hears an outcry. The need was evident. Nehemiah hears a need. He responds to the need, and then he gives us a model for what it would look like for us to maybe enter into that in our world. And so Nehemiah hears an outcry. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry. Nehemiah hears it. What do they say? What is that outcry? They hear it among their fellow Jews. This isn't outside. This is within the context of their family, their nation. They hear it from their fellow Jews. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Because of their investment in that wall, that there were some needs that started to arise specifically around food. Others said, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during this famine. Still others were saying, we've had to borrow money to pay the king's taxes on our fields and vineyards. As they were investing in the wall, people in the community started taking advantage of their fellow citizens. And so they began to cry out to Nehemiah about this outrage of what was taking place. What is that? What was that accusation? What were they crying out against? They were crying out against this idea of selfishness. That they were crying out to say, Nehemiah, our own people are starting to take advantage of us. When you hear the word selfishness, how do you define that? I'm going to throw up my definition. That my joy is more important than others and more important than God's glory. That I begin becoming inward focused in my actions. And so when you think of selfishness, what do we think of? My joy at what? The expense of others, and not really that concerned about who God is. How do we usually then define unselfishness? I'm going to actually say it's a misunderstanding. How do we usually understand unselfishness? Well, we flip them. We say, well, considering myself, it's not about my joy. It is about others' joy, and it is about seeing God glorified in our actions. Does that feel like most people's understanding of what unselfishness would be? And yet, I'm going to argue that there's a fuller picture of what a selfless life would look like. Rather than just seeing it as not about ourself, our joy for ourselves, not the joy of others, not God's glorious selfishness. Selflessness then becomes what it is. It is about helping people see God's glory. And it is about meeting the needs of others all around us. But what do you think actually contains a fuller picture of selflessness? Man, good morning, guys. It's good to see you guys this morning. We doing all right? We're here, we're alive. I've had a great week. I got to hang with 85 other pastors and ministry leaders on Monday. I got to have just a wonderful time with Tyler. I got to meet and greet with people in Kansas City, had some Kansas City barbecue. That was fantastic. What's contained in true selfless acts? Our joy. Our joy. Now, I need the kids to help me in this. What is like the greatest candy known to man? Does anybody know what this is? What is this, Theo? Dum-dums. So we have a can of these in the office. Theoretically, it's for the kids that come to visit the office. But the staff might disagree that I tend to enjoy some dum-dums from time to time. Can I have a kid come and join me just for a second? Theo, I'd love that, man. Come on up. So contained in the essence of selflessness is what? Is our joy. So Theo, you're gonna act along with me here, and so don't take anything I say to heart as offensive or anything that you might walk away with thinking I actually feel this way. So with that caveat, so embedded in this idea of wanting to give is what? Our joy. That we actually desire the good of others, God's glory, the good of others, and we actually want to do it. Versus this action. So Theo, I have a cup full of Dum Dums, and you love Dum Dums, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are wonderful. So I don't I don't really want to give you these. Like, this is, like, I really, like these a lot. And, I mean, blueberry is in here, and I love, like, the question mark ones. I kind of want to keep this for myself, but I heard, like, it's really valuable to, like, do good stuff for others. So, Theo, just take this. Would you take that?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, hang on 1 second. All right. So, there's scenario one. Now, unless I verbalized my heart, all you would have seen was, here, Theo, here's a cup full of dum-dums. But in giving you a window into my heart, you're doing such a good job, Theo. He's like, just give me the dum-dums already. But I gave you a window into my heart and told you what was really going on. What Nehemiah is inviting us into, he hears the outcry and he sees the selfishness taking place. And he's about to call his people. Selflessness would be, hey, Theo, I know that dum-dums are one of, if not your favorite candy. And it would delight me because of how much I know you love them and how much I want to give them to you, that I want to give you some dum-dums. Ultimately, that not just that you would see the gift, but you would actually see the God that's been so good to me. Does that feel different? Nice job, Theo. Give Theo a hand. You get to keep those too. You may or may not want to give them to your parents. Up to you. That's the picture that Nehemiah is inviting us into. He hears the outcry of the people within the Jewish family and how people are taking advantage of the people within their community. And so Nehemiah responds. How does he respond? Let's find out. When I heard their outcry and these charges, there's a visceral reaction that he feels. He says, I was very angry. But I love the way he then navigates those emotions. Here's what it says. And so I pondered them in my mind. I imagine when we look around and see different challenges or pain points or needs around us internally or externally, it starts to stir something in us. And so for Nehemiah, it says he pondered them. I love that idea. Nehemiah is rightfully angry, and we're going to find out a little bit later what stirs his anger, but there's an emotional response to what he sees. And then I love that he doesn't act out of anger. That feels key to me. He doesn't immediately act out of that anger, but instead ponders is what we're told. He takes time to think through the issues that he sees and how best to engage. And so how does he engage? Let's continue. So I continued. Here's what he says. What you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God? So I continued. What you're doing is not right. And so we get to see what specifically stirs for Nehemiah, what he sees as not right. Here's what he says. He's going to tell us God's people looked no different from those who didn't know him. God's people were acting in the same way as the culture they were embedded. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? Ought we have a different lens on how we view the world? If we claim that we long to experience God's glory displayed in the lives around us, ought we not look different? Specifically around the idea of genuine humility and selflessness. Ought we look different? Shouldn't our understanding of who God is inspire our actions? And then he sees an immediate response. God's people understood how God saw their interactions with one another. They respond immediately. They say, that is our heart. That is what we're after. And so they respond, we will give back what we've taken. It outlines it more in detail in verse 10 and 11. We will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. There was a sense that they saw God's heart for selflessness. That they saw God's heart to invest and care for those around them. Around here, that's our third value. We call it generous relationships. And it's not a new idea. throughout the Old Testament in Deuteronomy, if any among you, one of your brothers, should become poor, if any in towns within your land that the Lord your God has given you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend to him in sufficiency for his need, whatever it might be. Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. General, very specific ideas for them in their context. But that wasn't just an Old Testament context. Jesus picks up that same idea. And the king answered them, truly I say to you, as you did for one of the least of these, my brothers, you did for me. Do we look around and see the vulnerable or the needs around us? Again, and Paul giving us a model of who Jesus is. Do nothing from selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Man, this is where Bible memory comes back. Did you read any of the words that I was just quoting? I memorized it in the NASB, and so even as I'm reading this verse, I'm reading it in the NASB. I'm going to read it in the ESV. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. The posture of those who claim that we fear God, long to glorify God and love others, live in a way that reflects a heart to see and meet needs. And so Nehemiah then gives us an example. Here's what he does. This is what Nehemiah specifically does. Moreover, from the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when I was appointed to be the governor in the land of Judah until his 32nd year, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allotted to the governor, but the earlier governors, those preceded me, placed a heavy burden on the people and took 40 shekels of silver from them, in addition of food and wine. Their assistants also lorded it over the people. But out of reverence for God, I did not act like that. Instead, I devoted myself to the work on this wall. All my men were assembled there for the work. We did not acquire the land. Furthermore, 150 Jews and officials ate at my table, as well as those who came to us from the surrounding nations. Each day, 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, and some poultry were prepared for me, and every 10 days an abundant supply of wine of all kinds. In spite of all this, I never demanded the food allotted to the governor because the demands were heavy on the people. What do you notice about Nehemiah? And that is not a rhetorical question. What do you notice about the choices he made? And it's not a rhetorical question. That he acted in a way that longed, remember me with favor, my God, for all I have done. A longing for God to be glorified in real decisions for the good of others. Motivated, we saw him. There was a visceral response to the need, but then he pondered because he wanted to move, I would say, with joy, wanting to demonstrate to meet that need. We see it in his choice. What else? How else would you describe what you see in Nehemiah's choices? Yeah. He compares himself to another governor within that Israelite community and speaks to the choices that he was trying to make. Is he boasting? I don't think verse 19 is him boasting. Remember, my God, for all I have done for these people. We see when Jesus is at the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? He cries out and he says, remember. There's a call for remembrance. That there's a sense that God, we want to live in a way, we want to fear you, God, and we want to live in a way that reflects that. We want to live a heart of selflessness and generosity. God, help us continue to embody that as best we can. And so Nehemiah sets an example. The fear of God changes our perspective towards the vulnerable and aligns our hearts with his. And when we fail to help each other, Nehemiah is calling this out. When we fail to help each other, we work against that which God has called us to accomplish. And so there was this movement that we see in Nehemiah's story. The fear of God prompted in his heart led to this humility, led to an act, a lifestyle. But here's where I love. They're rebuilding a wall, literally. That movement is true as we are rebuilding lives around us. And so I hope when we think of selfishness compared to selflessness, it's not to the exclusion of the joy that God is inviting us into. And so something we got to speak about in Kansas City that I love about this organization that is helping fund this grant, they have a big heart for Monday Mattering as well. We got to hear from different speakers that are non-vocational ministry leaders, pastoring in their different contexts as doctors, as investment bankers, as educators. And so they helped inspire us. I'm going to encourage the same thing. We evaluate how we use our time, our treasure, our talent. When we look at our calendar and look at our quote-unquote checkbook, how do we spend what God has entrusted to us? And then something that I hope we see in Nehemiah, God's glory is what is highest in our minds, but the fear of loss and protecting myself are real. We have real responsibilities that we are entrusted with. Do you lock your doors? Maybe I say it this way. I lock my doors. Not because I don't care about those around me, but because I care deeply about those that are entrusted to me. And so, God's glory is what's highest in our minds, but the fear of loss and protecting myself are real. How do we continue to lift our eyes, both to invest in those around us internally and move to considering those around us externally with this in mind? It has been the thread throughout Nehemiah, if you've noticed. Nehemiah saw a need in Jerusalem. There was a doctor who spoke at this conference this past weekend, and he identified a need in Africa. And now he takes frequent trips, giving his particular profession and the area that he could step into, saw a need, and with his time, treasure, talent, saw an area of brokenness and restoration that he wanted to step into. There was an investment manager that felt like the way he was investing resources was being used inappropriately, and so he launched another organization to have more just investment principles in how he was investing resources. There was a nonprofit leader, and they're actually also connected here in Dane County. It's called Care Portal. And this gentleman saw a need in the foster adopt world and created a platform to step into that need. The needs are limitless, and yet here's our conviction that God has probably prompted on your hearts an area of brokenness and restoration that He might be inviting you into, in your homes, in your neighborhoods, in your world. I'm going to invite the worship team back up. And kids, I want to maybe specifically point it to you. When you go to sit at your lunch table, might you consider bringing an extra snack to share with someone? When you look around and see the kids sitting either here or at church or in your school, maybe there's someone sitting alone, and God would prompt you to maybe take an interest in their life or bring an extra snack that you might want to share. Something that might be a little harder. We occasionally do this with our kids, and it is an interesting exercise. Might you consider giving one of your toys or something that you deeply love or cherish to someone else that might want or need it? Not just the one you're going to give to St. Vinny's or Goodwill later on that week, right? But maybe you'd identify a need and an opportunity. Parents, the same is true. Maybe there's that area of opportunity or brokenness that you're seeing all around you. We collectively believe that the Planted Initiative is a way that we collectively could step in to a need, but not mitigating or taking away the personal opportunity you might have where you live, work, and play. So pray with me with that in mind. Jesus, you are so good. Thank you for who you are, what you're doing in our lives. Thank you for the story of Nehemiah. Thank you for the story of how he saw a need and attempted to step into it. Stir in our hearts the needs that exist all around us and prompt us for your heart and how we might more actively be a conduit of your grace. Thank you, Jesus. Always for your glory we pray.